What am I talking about when I say decluttering according to timelines rather than hard and fast rules? If you are someone who has had any trouble at all decluttering, you probably have seen other people, gurus, people on the internet talk about rules. And a lot of these rules are pretty arbitrary, right? They're just kind of pulled out of a hat a lot of times. There's not research or anything behind them. And one of those rules is often around books and wisdom and things that we collect, right? Famously, this is one of the things that people got a little upset about Marie Kondo with the number of books that she said you could have, so to speak. I'm not hating on her. I think she did beautiful things to lay the groundwork so I could be doing what I'm doing right now. But let's talk about why rules are so arbitrary and why it's better to declutter according to a timeline that's based in your own intuition, that's based in what you believe you need. So here's the story time, which will drive home the point. I have been doing lots of decluttering. If you're new to my world, I am 8 months pregnant. And so I have been doing lots of decluttering of my home because we need to make some space for this baby and all of this baby's things. So my husband and I were going through our books. And, a lot of the books I felt comfortable parting with. I was like, oh, I read this once. This is fine. I can part with this. And, so then this rule of, well, if you've read it once, you can get rid of it, kind of comes up. That's what my husband kept saying. He's like, well, I guess I should get rid of it. I've read it once. I'm never going to read it again. Here's where it is. This idea that if you read it once and you're never going to read it again, and you're not sure if you really want to give it up, this is where this idea of decluttering according to a timeline rather than a rule. So here it is. There was a book he took off the shelf, one of my books. I missed it. He took it off the shelf and he's like, this is all dusty. You haven't touched this in years. I was like, oh my God, I haven't. It is so dusty, you guys. And I was like, wow, this book is from when I did my doctorate. I have a doctorate in OT. I was like, oh my God, this is one of the first books I was taught to read. It was The Eighth Habit by Stephen Covey. It's actually linked in my Amazon, and there's a reason I'm keeping it now because it's still fabulous, 30 years later or 20 something years later. And so I start to read it and I'm like, oh my God, I have the biggest light bulb moment of my life. Not because it's like, wow, I really want to keep this book. There's still good wisdom here. I had been searching for 6 months to the answer to a personal question, and that answer was literally sitting on my shelf collecting dust. So let me say that again. Because I chose not to use an arbitrary rule of, well, I haven't touched this book in literally, when did I finish my doctorate? Maybe 8-9 years ago. Because I hadn't touched this book in 8 or 9 years, normal decluttering gurus would tell you to get rid of it, right? Sounds pretty logical, sounds very linear. But my husband pulling that book off the bookshelf that I had forgotten and me opening it up to a random page as I'm laying in bed 8 months pregnant and reading the exact wisdom in that moment that I needed to read to move me forward in a personal matter in my life was like an explosion. So if you declutter according to somebody else's arbitrary rules rather than your own intuition, you could be missing things for yourself. If I had listened to other gurus or other people on the internet talking about, well, if you haven't touched it in 6 months, it's got to go. We've all heard that, right? If you haven't worn it in 6 months, if you haven't touched it in 6 months, it's got to go. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the worst thing in the world, but if I had gotten rid of this book, I literally would not have been able to pick it up this past week, flip open to a random page, and allow the universe to speak to me and have it basically clear out this personal problem I had been dealing with for 6 months. That was meant to happen. So what I'm trying to say here is there are going to be some possessions in your life that are going to come in and out. I was able to get rid of lots of other books. I'm like, I read this once. I'm really good here. But there's going to be some possessions that it's okay if you hold on to them beyond what the normal gurus say. And I know that you're probably thinking, well, that's Stacy, that is the opposite of what I'm trying to do here. What are you doing to me? I know. But I do this specifically because I want you to begin to create and get embedded and strengthen your own intuition when it comes to your possessions. Nobody gets to tell you how long you should keep something. Nobody gets to tell you how many books you get to have. Nobody gets to tell you how much clothing you get to keep. Break away from this idea that minimalism is the end-all be-all. You get to decide how many possessions are in your world, are in your physical world. I am so grateful now that I never got rid of this book that, again, was dusty. I had not touched it in years because it literally solved a problem for me that I had been dealing with for 6 months. And you know what now? I am going to read it again. And now that timeline, this is where we come back to timelines, that timeline is closed. That timeline within me, that book finally finished serving its purpose. The answer that I needed was sitting on my shelf this whole time, y'all. And now I feel complete with this book. Now I feel complete. I can reread it again and I can say, mwah, goodbye. Go enrich somebody else's life. I release you. My timeline with this book is now over. But I couldn't have gotten there without my own intuition of every time I picked up that book in the last however many years and said, no, we're not finished yet. Me and this book, we're not done. If I had blindly followed everybody else's advice instead of listening to my own intuition. This is what I walk people through. Because again, it's not about the number of possessions you end up with. You can go that route. I'm not saying don't do that. You can totally go that route. But I do trauma-informed decluttering. I want you to be the most informed human on the planet when it comes to what you need in your home, in your life, in your possessions. Because then nobody can take that from you. Nobody can come in with the next onslaught, the next trend, because trust me, they're going to come. The next cool thing about minimalism or maximalism, and worm their way into your brain and make you feel shame if your home does not look a certain way. If your home does not function a certain way. You guys, I don't care at the end of the day what your home ends up looking like. It's that it serves you. You're not going to do this with every single possession. But if you feel something, it's okay to say, I'm not done with you yet. It's okay.